I set this book partly in Amsterdam because in the American romantic imagination, Amsterdam and Paris are the two cities where it's super romantic to kiss a girl. That's the first reason. But also, Amsterdam, particularly recently in the American imagination, has been taken over by, in the imagination, as a place where you smoke pot. And that is sort of like its primary definition. That really bothers me as someone who's been to Amsterdam many times and lived here for 2 months because, like a lot of people who spend a lot of time in Amsterdam, I don't smoke pot. And I still have a very fulfilling time here. And so I wanted to be the first American novelist in a generation to write about Amsterdam without writing about marijuana. And except for that one glancing mention of coffee shops, I don't. But the main reason I wanted to write about Amsterdam was because the girl at the center of this book, Hazel Grace Lancaster, has a kind of cancer that has metastasized into her lungs. And that, as a result of those tumors, liquid is pouring into her lungs all the time, very slowly, but pouring into her lungs in a way that is constantly sort of drowning her. And that is how she will die when she dies, in all likelihood, is from her lungs getting pneumonia or just giving out because they have to work too hard because there's so much fluid in her lungs. And there's a very complicated set of contraptions that kind of keep her alive by basically removing the fluid from her lungs periodically. Well, of course, this is very similar to the situation in which this great city finds itself dredged out of the water and half drowned in all kinds of beautiful ways. But I didn't want to set it in a place like Venice because Venice is depressing. And it's going to fall into the ocean, and that's sad. Like, there are very few places in the world better suited to rising sea levels than the Netherlands. You guys have been figuring this out for 450 years, and you'll continue to figure it out. So I wanted to set it in a place where, it wasn't any kind of political statement about the nature of sea levels, but that it was really about kind of the stunning fact that we are able to have this complicated relationship with water that we have that's really embodied in a lot of Dutch cities, which is that water is both the thing that nourishes us and the thing that threatens us. It is, both the nourisher and the destroyer of human life. And there are a lot of things like that in this book. There are a lot of things that bring both comfort and pain. There are a lot of things that, are causes both of joy and suffering. And the reason I wanted to write about that was because I wanted to get at the idea that those things aren't opposites. It's not fair to say that suffering is the opposite of joy. That dichotomous construction of pain and pleasure, of happiness and unhappiness, illness and wellness, a lot of times seeing those things in those stark contrasts to each other ignores the complex truth. And that was something that I was really struck by when I lived here. I lived here from April 15th to June 15th of 2011. I lived on the... Thank you. Or as I call it, the Spow, which is the same exact pronunciation.
Ajax.
Ajax. I could say Ajax. We're not going to, this is not going to turn into a football brawl. That's the last thing we need down here. It's crowded. And I saw Ajax win their 30th league championship. And I brought my 1-year-old son to the bar because I thought that was something that one did. And then there was like, glass flying, and I was like, desperately trying to hold him, And like, the guy in front of me was like jumping up and down on a table and fell and cracked his head open and jumped back up. So yeah, it was a different kind of football fandom than what one experiences in America. Where like soccer to us is seen as this game of the elites, this like very intellectual. And I'm serious. I will defend that. We can have that argument if you want. But while I was in Amsterdam, I was really sick. As it happens, I was sort of sick in two ways. The first way is that I was suffering, although I didn't quite understand it at the time, from this crushing anxiety about this book. I I was here basically to finish the book, to write the last big revision, and it was a very big revision. The last 50 pages of the book basically were written from scratch here. Much of the Amsterdam scenes were written here. A lot of the stuff early in the book was written here. And I knew that this was my last chance to make this book good, and I felt a lot of pressure, both because I only write a book like once every 4 years, so there's a lot at stake with each one, and because I was writing this book in a lot of ways inspired by a friend of mine named Esther, who died almost a year before we came to Amsterdam. And I felt this, what in retrospect was idiotic, this responsibility to her, as if there were any way that I could, tell a story that would somehow live up to her, or, and that was completely impossible. And until I let go of the impossibility of that, I was pretty miserable. So I was sort of like every day crushed by this, this sense of dread and doom. And this is my favorite city, and I've been here many times before, and I couldn't understand why I was so miserable. The other thing was that I couldn't eat food or drink beer because my gallbladder was broken, although I didn't know that at the time. So that is kind of a damper on one's pleasure in life. But I think it was because of those things that this last rewrite in the end proved to be so dramatic, to change the book so dramatically. I think transplanting myself into a really foreign world where, I have friends here, and obviously you all speak better English than I do, but even so, it is a very different country than the U.S. It's a very different place. It has different values, better values, and it's very different. And I think transplanting that and being sick allowed me, for the first time, to have a better understanding of Hazel's day-to-day, minute-to-minute life, living with illness, feeling constantly other, feeling constantly separated from her peers, because she was never going to be fully integrated into the social order of her world, because she was always going to be carrying around an oxygen tank, which is always going to be the first thing that you notice about her, just as I was never going to be fully integrated into Dutch culture due to my failure to pronounce Stouker. So I couldn't do anything as simple as order at a restaurant without the waitress or waiter answering back to me in English, because they didn't want to waste time trying to translate my Dutch. So I think that was really helpful. And the last thing that I would say is that the Dutch Nerdfighter community was, I know this book wouldn't have been the same, but I don't think that it would have even been finished if it hadn't been for the Dutch Nerdfighter community, because in this terrible time, and it was really, really a hard time, I don't want to understate it. I know sometimes people try to ignore or downplay both physical and mental or emotional illnesses, but it was a really hard 2 months for me trying to finish this book. And if I hadn't had the gift of being able to go around the Netherlands and Belgium and meet nerdfighters and spend time with you guys, I don't know if I would have been bolstered enough to finish it. I did so much writing on those train trips home, at least for the ones where you weren't on the train with me. And I did so much writing on the way to those gatherings. And I think, being able to know, being able to feel that support allowed me to feel integrated enough to be able to write instead of being like completely paralyzed, freaked out. So I'm very grateful to you for that. And the last thing that I want to say before I take some questions is that I'm very grateful to Linda Scott, my. I know, but I was just saying, did I say Linda Scott right? You guys. I'm saying exactly what you want me to say. I don't know what else I can do. My Dutch publisher for making it possible. There's no way I could have written this book without being in Amsterdam for 2 months, and there's no way I could have been here for 2 months if Linda Scott and the Dutch Literature Foundation hadn't worked together to make it possible for me to be the first young adult writer to have that residency, and for me to have my family here, which was such a such a comfort to me, and it would have been utterly impossible. So I'm happy to talk about the Dutch parts of The Fault in Our Stars. I'm also happy to talk about other things, and I'll take your questions for a little bit before we have to start I will remind you, very fast signing. And the last thing I'll remind you is that they have nice copies of the Dutch versions of my book for sale here, and that you should read in Dutch, because it is your heritage, and it is your language, and you have no idea how important that is, and you may not know until it starts to go away. So yeah, do take advantage of that opportunity. My books get better reviews in Dutch than in English, so my translators will. Questions? Yes.
Well, in your book it says that Hazel goes to Amsterdam because she wants to know how an imperial affliction ends.
Is this going to be very spoilery?
No, well, not really. So, maybe. Did you create an ending after the book ends with when she says "I do"?
No.
So.
Well, I can answer your question without spoilers, which is that no, I didn't. I don't know what happens after the book ends. I mean, I don't want to sound like Peter Van Houten, but like Peter Van Houten and I agree about almost everything. I just try not to be a jerk about it. Like, I think Van Houten is usually right. He's just a terrible person. Like a lot of geniuses, you know? So I know, I completely agree with him that look, what happens outside the text of the novel is for you to decide as the reader. And maybe as a reader of my own text, I get a say in that, but if I tell you, then my opinion will be privileged over yours, and I don't want that. In fact, Marcus Zusak just did this in a way that completely infuriated me. I'm not even going to tell any of you about it, because it's just going to ruin the book for you. I think books end when they end, and they end there for a reason, and then it falls to the authors of fan fiction to pick up the story. But I tried to leave Hazel and Gus in a good, present tense place. Yes?
Did you have a specific approach when you were writing the dialogue for the Dutch people in English? For example, realized dialogue?
Yeah, I mean, just to try to write, like, people who are, like, not as good at you as English, but pretty good. You know what I mean, though? Like, Dutch people use certain, like, certain adjectives a lot. They use the adjective nice a lot.
Sorry, can you speak up a bit?
Sorry, yeah, Dutch people use the adjective nice a lot when they're speaking in English, at least in my experience. And in fact, when Sarah and I went home from Holland for like 2 months, people would be like, "Why is everything nice?" Let me know if you can't hear me in the back. Can you hear me in the back? Okay.
Can you
So.
also repeat the question?
Okay, yeah, oh, good idea. The question was, did I have a theory for how to render the English dialogue of the people who speak Dutch as their first language? And I did, yeah. But it was mostly from listening and ear, and then also I had all these sound recordings of creepy sound recordings of Dutch people having conversations, usually at the library. You know, because if you're going to sit by me and talk, that's your punishment. Yeah. Yes.